The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands as my car careened toward the oak tree, brakes completely dead, and in that terrifying moment, I knew my own daughter had just tried to kill me. The impact threw me forward, airbag exploding in my face like a cruel slap from fate itself. When the world stopped spinning, I sat there bleeding from my forehead, thinking not about my injuries, but about the conversation I'd had with Rachel just 12 hours earlier. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I should probably start from the beginning, though the beginning feels like a lifetime ago now. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie, and at 67 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could offer. I was wrong. It started 3 weeks ago when my husband Robert passed away after 43 years of marriage. Lung cancer, quick and merciless, the kind that takes a good man before he's ready to go. Robert had been an investment banker, quiet and methodical about money, the type who read financial reports like bedtime stories. I knew he'd been successful, but I'd never paid much attention to the specific numbers. That was his domain, not mine. The day after the funeral, Rachel showed up at my house with her husband Brad and their 16-year-old son Tyler. I was still in my black dress, still feeling hollowed out by grief, when she walked into my kitchen like she owned the place. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's will," she said, not even bothering with condolences or asking how I was holding up. "Rachel, honey, can't this wait? Your father's barely been gone 72 hours. "The lawyer called," Brad interrupted, his voice sharp with excitement. "There's more money than we thought, a lot more." I stared at them, these two people I'd raised and welcomed into my family, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What are you talking about?" Rachel pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Dad was worth $30 million. Mom, $30 million. And according to this, it's all going to you." The number hit me like a physical blow. $30 million. Robert and I had lived comfortably, sure, but I'd had no idea we were that wealthy. He'd always been modest about money, driving the same car for 10 years, clipping coupons, insisting we didn't need a bigger house. "That's impossible," I whispered. "It's not impossible, it's just unfair," Rachel snapped. "You're 67 years old, Mom. What are you going to do with $30 million? Buy a yacht? Take cruises around the world? Meanwhile, Brad and I are drowning in debt. Tyler needs college money, and we're about to lose our house." I looked at my grandson, who was staring at his phone, deliberately avoiding eye contact. This conversation was clearly planned, rehearsed, and he wanted no part of it. "Rachel, I just learned about this money 5 minutes ago. Can we please discuss this rationally?" "There's nothing to discuss," Brad said, leaning forward with that aggressive posture he used when he wanted something. "You don't need $30 million. Nobody your age needs that kind of money. The responsible thing would be to distribute it now while we can all benefit from it." "The responsible thing," I repeated slowly, tasting the manipulation in those words. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Rachel reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. "Transfer the inheritance to us. We'll take care of everything, Mom. You'll never have to worry about money or investments or any of that complicated stuff. We'll make sure you're comfortable for the rest of your life, the rest of my life." As if I were already dying, already irrelevant, already a burden to be managed rather than a person with her own wishes and dreams. "I need time to think about this," I said firmly. Rachel's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something ugly flash across her face. "Time to think? Mom, this is family. We're not asking you to think. We're asking you to do the right thing." But what Rachel didn't know was that 36 hours later, I'd be sitting in a wrecked car, wondering if doing the right thing was going to get me killed. The morning after Rachel's visit, I sat in my lawyer's office trying to process the reality of Robert's fortune. Harold Brennan had been our attorney for 20 years, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes who'd handled our wills, our house purchases, all the mundane legal business of a long marriage. "Your husband was very specific about his intentions, Maggie," Harold said, sliding a copy of the will across his desk. "Everything goes to you, with clear instructions that you should use the money however you see fit. He didn't want anyone else making decisions about your financial future." I ran my finger along Robert's signature, remembering how carefully he'd always signed important documents. Harold, I had no idea we had this much money. Robert was an exceptional investor. He also inherited a significant amount from his father's real estate business, money he invested wisely over the decades. The bulk of it came from a software company he bought stock in back in the 80s. Nobody expected it to become what it became. Microsoft. My husband had been quietly holding Microsoft stock for 40 years. Did Rachel know about this? I asked. Harold's expression darkened slightly. She's called my office 6 times in the past week, demanding details about the estate. I've told her repeatedly that I can only discuss this with you, but she's been quite persistent. Persistent, that was a polite way of putting it. That was a polite. Rachel had always been determined, even as a child, but somewhere along the way, the determination had twisted into something more demanding, more entitled. She wants me to transfer the money to her and Brad, I said. That's your decision to make, Maggie. But I feel obligated to mention that your husband specifically included a clause in his will. Harold flipped to the second page. If you choose to give away more than half the inheritance within the first year, the remainder goes to the American Cancer Society. Robert was very clear about this. He wanted to make sure you kept enough to live comfortably, regardless of family pressure. Family pressure. Robert had known. Somehow, he'd anticipated exactly what would happen after he died. I drove home slowly, thinking about the man I'd been married to for 4 decades. Robert had never been dramatic or confrontational, but he'd always been observant. He'd watched Rachel's marriage deteriorate over the years, watched Brad's business failures pile up, watched the way they looked at our house and cars and lifestyle with increasing resentment. He'd protected me even after death. My phone was ringing as I walked through the front door. Rachel, of course. Mom, Brad and I have been talking all night. We've come up with a plan that works for everyone. Rachel, I haven't even had time to process. We'll take $25 million, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. That leaves you $5 million, which is more than enough for your needs. You can stay in the house, keep your car, live exactly like you have been. And we'll handle all the investment decisions so you don't have to worry about managing that much money. $5 million. She was offering to let me keep 1/6 of my own inheritance, like it was an act of generosity. And if I say no? I asked. The silence stretched too long. Why would you say no, Mom? We're family. Family takes care of family. Your father worked his entire life to build this nest egg, Rachel. He left it to me because he trusted me to make good decisions with it. Dad also didn't expect to die at 69, Rachel shot back. If he'd lived another 20 years, there wouldn't be anything left anyway. You'd have spent it on medical bills and nursing homes and all the expensive things that come with getting old. Getting old. As if aging were a moral failing, something selfish I was doing to inconvenience her. I'm not giving you $25 million. Rachel, $10 million then. Mom, be reasonable. Brad's business is failing. We're behind on our mortgage. Tyler needs college money. We're drowning here while you're sitting on more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. I said no. The silence this time felt different. Colder. You're making a mistake. Mom, a big mistake. Family is all you have left now that Dad's gone. You might want to think about what happens to old women who isolate themselves from the people who love them. She hung up before I could respond, but her words echoed in my mind for hours afterward. Old women who isolate themselves. It sounded almost like a threat, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my daughter, not some stranger. Rachel was angry and desperate, but she wouldn't actually hurt me. Would she? 3 days later, I made my position crystal clear. Rachel and Brad came over for what they called a family meeting, though it felt more like an intervention designed to wear down my resistance. Mom, we've talked to Tyler about this, Rachel started, using our grandson as emotional leverage. He's worried about you living alone in this big house with all this money. What if someone breaks in? What if something happens to you? What if you fall and there's no one here to help? Brad added. At your age, a simple accident could be fatal. My age again. They kept talking about my 67 years like I was already decrepit, already incompetent, already halfway to the grave. I appreciate your concern, I said dryly, but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Are you, though? Rachel leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. When's the last time you balanced a checkbook? Do you even know how to log into Dad's investment accounts? This much money requires professional management, Mom. It's not something you can just figure out on your own. I ran a bookkeeping business for 15 years before I married your father, I reminded her. I think I can handle my own finances. That was 30 years ago. Things have changed. Everything's online now. Everything's complicated. You'll make mistakes, lose money, get taken advantage of by financial advisors who see an elderly widow as an easy target. Elderly widow. Another charming phrase designed to make me feel helpless. The answer is still no, I said firmly. Brad's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You're being selfish and stubborn, and you're going to regret it. Excuse me? You heard me. You're acting like a spoiled child who won't share her toys. That money could change our lives, could secure Tyler's future, could solve all our problems. But instead, you want to hoard it like some miser. I stood up, my temper finally overriding my shock. Get out of my house. Mom, wait. Rachel tried to interject, but I was done being polite. Get out, both of you, and don't come back until you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve. They left in a fury of slammed doors and screeching tires. I stood at my living room window, watching their car disappear down my street, and felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd finally stood up for myself. Sadness because I'd just burned bridges with my only child. But I'd made the right decision. Robert had left that money to me, not to Rachel and Brad. If they wanted financial security, they could work for it the same way Robert and I had. The next morning, I woke up to find my morning newspaper missing from the driveway. A small thing, but strange. I'd been getting the same paper delivered for 12 years, and it had never been late or misdelivered. The day after that, my mailbox was knocked over. The mail carrier said it looked like someone had hit it with a baseball bat, though no one had seen anything. On Thursday, I came home from grocery shopping to find my garbage cans scattered across the lawn, trash everywhere, as if someone had deliberately kicked them over. Small incidents, petty vandalism, the kind of thing teenagers might do on a dare. But the timing felt deliberate, calculated to make me feel unsafe in my own home. I didn't call Rachel to complain. I didn't call the police either, though I probably should have. Instead, I cleaned up the messes and told myself I was imagining patterns where none existed. But on Friday morning, when I went to start my car and the engine made a grinding sound it had never made before, I finally admitted what I'd been trying not to think. Someone was sending me a message, and that someone wanted me to understand exactly how vulnerable I was. Living alone in a big house with $30 million and no protection except the locks on my doors. The question was, how far were they willing to go to make their point? I was about to find out. Saturday morning, I had an appointment with my financial advisor downtown. Simple enough. A 20-minute drive through familiar neighborhoods to discuss how to invest Robert's inheritance responsibly. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the years, always feeling safe in my reliable Honda Civic. I should have known something was wrong when the brake pedal felt spongy as I backed out of my driveway. But I'd been distracted, thinking about the meeting ahead, mentally rehearsing questions about mutual funds and retirement planning. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that usually lifted my spirits. The first real sign of trouble came when I reached the stop sign at the end of my street. I pressed the brake pedal, and it went halfway to the floor before the car reluctantly slowed. Strange, but not alarming enough to turn around. I told myself it was probably just morning condensation on the brake pads, something that would work itself out after a few more stops. By the time I reached the main road, I knew I was in serious trouble. The pedal was going all the way to the floor now, and the car was barely slowing down. My heart started racing as I pumped the brakes frantically, feeling nothing but empty resistance. I was doing 45 miles per hour down a busy street with no way to stop. The intersection ahead had a red light. Cars were crossing from both directions, and I was approaching fast with no way to slow down. I laid on the horn and swerved into the left turn lane, missing a blue sedan by inches. The driver honked angrily, having no idea he'd just witnessed an attempted murder, because by then, I was certain that's what this was. The brake line hadn't failed naturally. Someone had cut it, someone had sabotaged my car, someone had sent me out this morning expecting me to die in a fiery crash that would look like nothing more than a tragic accident. The oak tree came into view as I crested the hill doing 50 miles per hour. A massive old tree, probably 100 years old, standing alone in a small park on the right side of the road. In that split second, I had a choice. Try to make the curve ahead and risk hitting other cars, or aim for the tree and hope the impact wouldn't kill me. I chose the tree. The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands as my car careened toward the oak, brakes completely dead, and in that terrifying moment, I knew my own daughter had just tried to kill me. The impact was tremendous. The airbag exploded in my face like a fist, and the sound of crumpling metal filled the air. My seatbelt cut into my chest as the car folded around the ancient trunk. For a moment, everything went white and silent. When my vision cleared, I was slumped forward against the deflated airbag, blood trickling from a cut on my forehead. My chest ached, my hands were shaking, but I was alive. Miraculously, impossibly alive. People were running toward the car, shouting questions, calling 911. A young man with kind eyes pried open my driver's door and knelt beside me. "Ma'am, don't move. The ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." But as I sat there waiting for help, one thought kept cycling through my mind. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tried to kill me for $30 million, and they'd failed, which meant they'd probably try again. And I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking my pulse, shining lights in my eyes, asking standard questions about pain and dizziness. I answered honestly. I was hurt, but not seriously injured, shaken, but coherent. "You're very lucky," the lead paramedic said, as they loaded me into the ambulance. "Cars don't usually survive impacts like that. That tree probably saved your life by stopping you before you could hit something worse." Lucky. If only he knew how unlucky I'd really been. At the hospital, while doctors stitched up my forehead and x-rayed my ribs, I had time to think. Someone had sabotaged my car, counting on me to die in the crash. If I had died, Rachel would have inherited everything. There wouldn't have been time for the 1-year clause in Robert's will to take effect. But I was alive, and now I knew exactly what my loving daughter was capable of. The question was, what was I going to do about it? They released me from the hospital that evening with a concussion, 3 stitched-up cuts, and bruised ribs that would ache for weeks. Rachel showed up just as I was being discharged, playing the role of the concerned daughter with Oscar-worthy dedication. "Oh, Mom, thank God you're okay," she said, rushing to embrace me. When the hospital called, I was terrified. I got here as fast as I could. The hospital called her. Interesting. I was listed as single on all my medical forms. Robert's death had changed that status, which meant Rachel was no longer my emergency contact. Yet somehow she'd been notified within hours of my accident. "How did you know I was here?" I asked carefully. "Tyler saw it on social media. Someone posted a video of your car wrapped around that tree. We've been worried sick." A video. Of course. In today's world, every tragedy becomes entertainment for strangers with smartphones. "The important thing is that you're safe," Brad said, appearing beside her with flowers that looked like they'd come from the hospital gift shop. "Though this really makes us think about what we discussed the other day. You're not getting any younger, Maggie, and accidents like this are going to become more common. More common." As if brake failure was a natural consequence of aging, rather than deliberate sabotage. "The police officer said it looked like brake failure," Rachel continued. "Probably just wear and tear on an older car. These things happen. But I'd had my car serviced 2 months ago. The mechanic had specifically checked the brakes and pronounced them in excellent condition. Brake lines don't just spontaneously fail on well-maintained vehicles. "I suppose you'll want to stay with us while you recover," Rachel said. "You shouldn't be alone right now, not with a concussion. What if you fall? What if something happens during the night?" The offer sounded generous, caring, exactly what a loving daughter should suggest. But all I could think about was how convenient it would be for them to have me under their roof, vulnerable and isolated from anyone who might ask difficult questions. "Thank you, but I'll be fine at home," I said firmly. "Mom, be reasonable. You can barely walk without wincing. You need someone to take care of you." I said I'll be fine. Rachel's mask slipped slightly, just enough for me to see the frustration underneath. She'd orchestrated this whole scenario, the brake failure, the near-fatal accident, the hospital stay, all to position herself as my rescuer, the devoted daughter taking care of her helpless mother. My refusal to cooperate was ruining her script. "Well, at least let us drive you home," Brad said. Your car is totaled, and you're in no condition to call a taxi. I agreed to the ride because I didn't have much choice, but I sat in their back seat, studying their faces in the rearview mirror, watching for tells, for signs of guilt or nervousness. Rachel chattered nervously about physical therapy and home health aides. Brad kept glancing at me in the mirror, his expression unreadable. When we reached my house, they insisted on coming inside, checking the locks, making sure I had everything I needed. Their concern felt suffocating, performative, like actors overplaying their roles. "Promise you'll call if you need anything," Rachel said, as they finally prepared to leave. "Anything at all, Mom. We're here for you." After they left, I sat in my living room with the lights off, thinking someone had tried to kill me today, and that someone was almost certainly my own daughter. The realization should have destroyed me, should have sent me into a spiral of grief and disbelief. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: clarity. If Rachel was willing to commit murder for $30 million, she wasn't going to stop just because the first attempt had failed. She'd try again, probably soon, and next time she might succeed. Unless I stopped her first. But to stop her, I'd need proof. Something more concrete than suspicions and coincidences. I'd need evidence that would hold up in court, evidence that would expose her for what she really was. Monday morning, I called a security company and had cameras installed throughout my house. Tiny, wireless cameras that could record everything and upload the footage to a cloud server. The technician, a young woman named Sarah, was professional and discreet. "Are you concerned about break-ins?" she asked, as she positioned a camera near my front door. "I'm concerned about people who might want to hurt me," I said honestly. She paused in her work, studying my bruised face and bandaged forehead. "These cameras will record everything. Motion-activated, high-definition, night vision capability. If someone tries something, we'll catch it." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." The cameras had been recording for exactly 4 days when they captured something that made my blood run cold. I was reviewing the footage on my laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of empty rooms and routine activities, when I spotted movement in my kitchen at 2:17 a.m. Rachel had a key to my house. I'd given it to her years ago for emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. This was reconnaissance. She moved through my kitchen like a ghost, opening cabinets, checking my prescription bottles, examining the contents of my refrigerator. She wasn't stealing anything, just gathering information. After 10 minutes, she moved to my home office, where she photographed documents on my desk with her phone. But the most chilling part came when she walked into my bedroom, where I lay sleeping just 15 feet away from where she stood. The infrared camera captured her clearly as she watched me for nearly a minute, her expression cold and calculating. She was studying me like a problem to be solved. Then she left as quietly as she'd come. The next night's footage was even worse. This time, Brad was with her. They came prepared with latex gloves and small tools, and they spent an hour systematically searching my house. They found my emergency cash stash in the bedroom drawer. They photographed my social security card and birth certificate. They even took pictures of my medication bottles, probably researching what would happen if I suddenly took too many pills. But the conversation I overheard through the camera's audio feed was what convinced me I was dealing with people who had already crossed a line from which there was no return. "The break thing didn't work," Brad whispered as they rifled through my desk. "She's tougher than we thought." "Or luckier," Rachel replied. "But luck runs out, especially for old women living alone." "What's plan B?" Rachel held up one of my prescription bottles, blood pressure medication that I took daily. Heart attack. Completely believable at her age, especially after a traumatic accident. A little extra potassium in her system, and it'll look like natural causes. How much extra potassium? Enough to stop her heart, but not enough to show up in a basic autopsy. I've been researching it online. The key is to make it look like she just got confused about her dosages, maybe took too many pills by accident, or mixed medications she shouldn't have mixed. My hands shook as I watched my daughter plan my murder with the casual efficiency of someone discussing a grocery list. This wasn't a moment of desperation or anger. This was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded planning. "When?" Brad asked. "Soon. The longer we wait, the more suspicious it becomes. And I don't like how she's been acting lately. Too alert, too independent. It's like she suspects something. They spent another 20 minutes in my house, photographing papers, memorizing my routines, planning my death. When they finally left, I sat in the dark for hours, struggling to accept what I'd just witnessed. My daughter wanted to kill me. Not in a moment of rage, not in self-defense, not even in desperation. She wanted to murder me methodically and deliberately for money. But I had something she didn't know about. Evidence. Hours of high-definition video footage showing her breaking into my home, discussing murder methods, planning to poison me with my own medication. It was enough to send her to prison for a very long time. The question now was when and how to spring the trap. Because Rachel was right about one thing. Time was running out. If I waited too long, I might not survive to see justice served. But I'd learned something important about myself in these past few weeks. I was tougher than anyone thought, tougher than Rachel expected, tougher than Brad anticipated, and maybe even tougher than I'd realized. I'd survived one murder attempt already. Now it was time to make sure there wouldn't be a second one. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and my dear daughter was in for the surprise of her life. The next morning, I called Detective Maria Santos at the county sheriff's office. I'd met her 2 years earlier when our neighborhood had a string of break-ins, and she'd impressed me with her thoroughness and intelligence. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be her. "Mrs. Sullivan, I remember you," she said when I identified myself. "How can I help you today?" "I need to report a conspiracy to commit murder," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My daughter and her husband are planning to kill me for my inheritance." There was a brief pause. "Ma'am, those are serious accusations. Can you come in and file a formal report?" "I have video evidence," I continued. "Multiple recordings of them breaking into my house, discussing murder methods, and planning to poison me with my own medication." The pause was longer this time. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm going to need you to come in immediately and bring those recordings with you." An hour later, I sat in Detective Santos's office, watching her face change as she reviewed the camera footage on my laptop. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute, and by the time she'd seen Rachel and Brad's midnight planning session, she was practically radiating anger. "This is unbelievable," she said, pausing the video at a particularly damaging moment where Rachel was explaining how much potassium it would take to trigger a fatal heart attack. "Your own daughter. I know it's hard to believe." "Oh, I believe it," Detective Santos interrupted. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Mrs. Sullivan. I've seen children kill their parents for a lot less than $30 million. What I can't believe is how casually they're discussing it, like they're planning a dinner party." She leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do about it? We have enough evidence here to arrest them both on conspiracy charges, but if we move too quickly, they might claim it was all just talk, that they never intended to follow through. What are you suggesting?" "We let them try." Her eyes were hard as flint. "We set up surveillance. We wire you with recording equipment, and we let them make their move. When they actually attempt to poison you, we'll have them dead to rights on attempted murder charges." The thought of deliberately putting myself in danger, of allowing Rachel to think she was succeeding in killing me, made my stomach turn. But Detective Santos was right. Conspiracy to commit murder was one thing, but attempted murder carried a much longer prison sentence. "How do we keep me safe while they're trying to kill me?" "We'll have officers positioned around your house, medical personnel standing by, and you'll be wearing a wire that will monitor constantly. The moment they make their move, we'll intervene." I thought about Robert, about the life we'd built together, about the daughter I'd raised who was now plotting my death. He would have wanted justice. He would have wanted Rachel to face consequences for her choices. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." Detective Santos smiled grimly. "Good, because frankly, Mrs. Sullivan, people like your daughter don't stop until someone stops them. This might be your only chance to make sure you live to enjoy that inheritance your husband left you." We spent the next 2 hours planning the operation. I would continue my normal routine, acting as if I suspected nothing. When Rachel and Brad made their move, I'd wear a wire and pretend to be their victim. The police would be watching everything, ready to move the instant my life was in real danger. "One more thing," Detective Santos said as I prepared to leave. "Whatever happens, don't try to be a hero. These people have already shown they're willing to commit murder. If something goes wrong, if you feel like you're in genuine danger, just say the code word butterfly and we'll come in immediately. Butterfly. Such a delicate word for such a deadly situation. But as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's death. A sense of purpose. Rachel thought she was hunting a helpless old woman. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that would destroy her life as thoroughly as she'd tried to destroy mine. Let the games begin. Rachel called the next evening, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. Mom, I've been thinking about what happened with your car accident. You're still recovering, and I feel terrible about not being more supportive. That's very kind of you, sweetheart, I said, playing my part perfectly, while the tiny recording device taped to my chest captured every word. Why don't I come over tomorrow and make you dinner? Like when I was little, remember? We can spend some quality time together, just the two of us. Just the two of us. Perfect for murder, in other words. That sounds wonderful, Rachel. I'd love that. Great. I'll come by around 6. I'll bring groceries and cook your favorite meal, that chicken casserole you used to make for me when I was sick. The irony was almost too much. She was going to poison me with a meal that represented maternal comfort and care. If I weren't wearing a wire for the police, I might have laughed at the twisted symbolism. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I could see unmarked police cars positioned strategically around my neighborhood, and I knew Detective Santos was monitoring my wire from a van parked 3 blocks away. Medical personnel were standing by at the local hospital, ready to pump my stomach or provide whatever emergency care might be needed. Rachel arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying grocery bags and wearing the brightest smile I'd seen on her face in weeks. She looked like a woman without a care in the world, not someone planning to commit matricide before dessert. You look tired, Mom, she said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold against my skin. Have you been sleeping okay since the accident? Not really, I admitted, which was true enough. I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't been wearing my seatbelt. Well, you're safe now. That's what matters. She bustled into the kitchen, unpacking ingredients with the efficiency of someone who'd planned this meal very carefully. Why don't you relax in the living room while I cook? I want to pamper you tonight. I settled into my favorite armchair, watching through the kitchen doorway as Rachel prepared what she intended to be my last meal. She moved confidently, seasoning the chicken, chopping vegetables, boiling noodles. Everything looked normal, domestic, loving, until she thought I wasn't looking. I caught the moment in my peripheral vision. Rachel opening her purse and pulling out a small prescription bottle. She glanced toward the living room, confirming I was distracted by the television, then quickly shook several pills into her palm. With practiced movements, she crushed the pills with the flat side of a knife and stirred the powder into the casserole. Potassium supplements, just like she'd discussed with Brad on the surveillance footage. Dinner's almost ready, she called out cheerfully, as if she hadn't just seasoned my food with enough medication to stop my heart. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. The wire was recording everything. The police were listening. I just had to survive the next hour without actually eating enough poisoned casserole to kill me. Rachel brought me a plate piled high with chicken, noodles, and vegetables. It looked delicious, perfectly normal, exactly like the comfort food she'd promised. She settled into the chair across from me with her own plate, which I noticed contained significantly less food than mine. This looks wonderful, sweetheart, I said, taking a small forkful and moving it toward my mouth. I made it with extra love, she replied, watching me intently. Extra love, extra potassium. Same thing apparently in Rachel's twisted mind. I pretended to eat, moving food around on my plate, taking tiny bites and chewing carefully before spitting them into my napkin when she wasn't looking. It was a delicate dance, appearing to consume the meal while actually avoiding the poison. After 20 minutes, Rachel started looking concerned. You're not eating much, Mom. Is something wrong with the casserole? It's delicious, honey. I guess I'm just not as hungry as I thought. But you need to keep your strength up, especially after the accident. Here, let me heat this up for you. Sometimes food tastes better when it's really hot. She took my plate back to the kitchen, and I heard the microwave running. When she returned, the casserole was steaming, and she'd added an extra helping. There, that should be much better. This time, she didn't leave me alone. She sat directly across from me, watching every bite, encouraging me to eat more, commenting on how much better I looked already. The attention was suffocating, maternal, and absolutely terrifying. I managed to eat about a quarter of the poisoned food, enough to make me sick, but hopefully not enough to kill me, before I started feeling the effects. My heart began racing, my vision blurred slightly, and my hands developed a tremor I couldn't control. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel asked, but there was excitement in her voice rather than concern. "I feel strange," I said, which wasn't acting anymore. "Dizzy, like my heart is beating too fast." "Maybe you should lie down," she suggested, standing quickly. "Here, let me help you to the bedroom." But instead of helping me, she stepped back and watched as I struggled to stand on increasingly unsteady legs. She was studying me like a scientist observing a lab rat, taking mental notes on the progression of symptoms. That's when I realized she wasn't planning to call 911. She was going to sit there and watch me die, probably coaching me through my final moments with fake comfort while secretly celebrating her victory. My daughter was a monster, and I was about to give her exactly what she deserved. "Butterfly," I whispered, just loud enough for the wire to pick up. The word had barely left my lips when everything happened at once. My front door exploded inward as police officers stormed into the house, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Detective Santos burst through the kitchen door, followed by paramedics who immediately surrounded me with emergency equipment. Rachel's face went through an entire spectrum of emotions in about 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, realization, and finally, pure rage. "What is this?" she screamed, backing against the wall as officers moved to restrain her. "What's happening? Mom, what did you do?" "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder," Detective Santos said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." "This is insane. I was taking care of my mother. She's having some kind of medical emergency." But even as she protested, the paramedics were testing my blood pressure, checking my pulse, and preparing to transport me to the hospital. My heart was racing dangerously fast, and my body was struggling to process the potassium overload I deliberately consumed. "We'll need to pump her stomach," one of the paramedics said, "and get her on cardiac monitoring immediately." "No!" Rachel shouted, fighting against the handcuffs. "You don't understand. She's confused. She's paranoid. She's been acting strange since Dad died." Detective Santos held up her phone, which had been recording Rachel's voice through my wire. "Ma'am, we have you on tape discussing murder methods with your husband. We have video footage of you breaking into your mother's house multiple times. And we just watched you poison her food with crushed potassium supplements." The fight went out of Rachel all at once. She slumped against the wall, her face pale and slack with shock. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," I said, my voice hoarse but stronger than I felt. "Long enough to see exactly what kind of person you really are." As the paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, I caught Rachel's eye one last time. "Your father would be ashamed of you," I said. "He loved you so much. And this is how you honor his memory? By trying to murder the woman he spent his life protecting?" Rachel started crying then. Not tears of remorse, but tears of rage and frustration. She was crying because she'd been caught, not because she regretted what she'd tried to do. "You don't understand," she sobbed as the officers led her toward the door. "You don't understand what it's like, watching you sit on all that money while we struggle. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right." "Murder is never right," Detective Santos said firmly. "And $30 million is never worth your mother's life." "It would have been quick," Rachel said, looking directly at me. "I would have made it quick and painless. That's more mercy than you showed me, making me beg for money that should have been mine anyway." The casual way she discussed my planned murder, as if she were explaining a business decision, chilled me to the bone. This wasn't my daughter speaking anymore. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone whose love for money had completely consumed whatever love she'd once had for me. At the hospital, doctors worked for 3 hours to stabilize my heart rhythm and flush the excess potassium from my system. I'd come closer to dying than I'd expected, close enough that the doctors were amazed I'd survived without permanent damage. "You're very lucky," Dr. Peterson told me as I recovered in the cardiac unit. "A few more bites of that food, and we might not have been able to save you." Lucky. There was that word again. But this time, I knew it wasn't luck that had saved me. It was preparation, courage, and the help of people who cared more about justice than family loyalty. Detective Santos visited me the next morning with an update on Rachel's case. "She's confessed to everything," she said, settling into the visitor's chair beside my bed. "The brake tampering, the break-ins, the poisoning. Her husband Brad is trying to claim he was coerced, but we have him on video discussing murder methods. They're both looking at 25 to life. 25 to life. My daughter would spend the rest of her existence in prison, and she'd put herself there through her own greed and cruelty. How do you feel about that?" Detective Santos asked gently. I thought about it for a long moment. "Sad," I said finally. "But not sorry. She made her choice, and now she has to live with the consequences. Any regrets about how you handled this?" "Only one," I said. "I regret that it took me so long to see who she really was. But that was behind me now. Rachel was going to prison. Brad was facing his own charges. And I was finally free to live my life without fear. $30 million was a lot of money. But my life, my real life, the one where I could sleep peacefully without worrying about being murdered in my bed, was priceless." The trial was a media sensation. "Daughter tries to murder mother for $30 million inheritance," ran as headlines across the country. And reporters camped outside the courthouse every day for 3 weeks. I became an unwilling celebrity, the grandmother who'd outsmarted her murderous daughter with hidden cameras and police cooperation. Rachel's defense attorney tried to paint her as a desperate mother driven to extremes by financial pressure. He talked about Brad's failed businesses, Tyler's college expenses, the crushing weight of debt that had made them do terrible things. But the prosecution had hours of video footage showing Rachel coldly planning my death, and my testimony about the brake tampering sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, breaking and entering, and criminal endangerment. Brad received a similar sentence, though his cooperation with prosecutors earned him a slightly reduced term. Throughout the trial, Rachel never looked at me directly. She sat at the defendant's table with perfect posture. Dressed in conservative clothes her lawyer had chosen to make her look sympathetic. But I could see the anger radiating from her like heat from a furnace. She was furious at being caught, not remorseful about what she'd done. Tyler, my 16-year-old grandson, was in the courtroom for the sentencing. He'd been living with Brad's parents since his parents' arrest, and he looked lost, confused, and heartbroken. When the judge sentenced Rachel to 27 years in prison, Tyler started crying silently. After the sentencing, I approached him in the hallway. "Tyler, honey," I said gently, "I know this is incredibly hard for you." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes that reminded me painfully of Rachel at the same age. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about what Mom tried to do to you." "You have nothing to apologize for," I said firmly. "None of this was your fault. But I knew they were having money problems. I heard them fighting about it. If I had said something, maybe nothing would have changed, except that you would have been in danger too," I interrupted. "Your mother made her choices, Tyler. You didn't make them for her." He hugged me then, this tall, gangly teenager who'd lost both parents to greed and stupidity. We stood in the courthouse hallway, holding each other while reporters snapped pictures and his paternal grandparents waited patiently nearby. "What happens now?" he asked when we finally separated. "Now you focus on finishing high school and figuring out what you want to do with your life," I said. "And you know that college is taken care of. Your grandfather Robert set up an education fund for you years ago. It's separate from everything that happened with your parents." Tyler's face showed the first spark of hope I'd seen since the trial began. "Really? Really? Your grandfather loved you, honey. He wanted to make sure you had opportunities, no matter what." 6 months after the trial ended, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I established a foundation in Robert's name, dedicating $25 million to supporting seniors who were being financially abused by their own family members. The remaining $5 million was more than enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The Robert Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection provided legal assistance, counseling services, and safe housing for older adults whose children or grandchildren were stealing from them, manipulating them, or worse. It turned out to be a more common problem than I'd ever imagined. Detective Santos, who'd become a friend during the investigation, helped me understand the scope of the issue. Elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, she explained over coffee one afternoon. And family members are the perpetrators in about 60% of cases. What Rachel did to you wasn't unusual, Maggie. It was just unusually well documented. The Foundation's first client was a 73-year-old woman named Dorothy, whose son had been forging her signature on checks and slowly draining her life savings. Her story was heartbreakingly similar to mine, except that Dorothy didn't have hidden cameras or $30 million to protect herself with. I never thought my own son would steal from me, she told me during our first meeting. I raised him. I loved him. I trusted him completely. How could he do this to me? It was the same question I'd asked myself about Rachel 100 times. The answer was always the same. Some people value money more than love, and blood relation doesn't protect you from that kind of cruelty. But helping other victims helped heal something in me that I didn't even know was broken. Every senior citizen we helped, every family member we prosecuted, every dollar we recovered, it all felt like justice not just for them, but for Robert, for me, and for every parent who'd ever been betrayed by their own child. Tyler graduated high school with honors and started college that fall, majoring in criminal justice. He said he wanted to work in law enforcement someday, to help people like his grandmother who'd been victimized by people they trusted. I want to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, he told me at his graduation party. Looking at him, this smart, compassionate young man who'd emerged from such a terrible family situation with his integrity intact, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not gratitude for what Rachel had done, but gratitude for what her actions had revealed. They'd shown me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could survive betrayal and fight back against injustice. They'd led me to a purpose that gave meaning to Robert's legacy and my own life, and they'd proven that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all. It's the knowledge that you have the courage to protect what matters most. 2 years after Rachel's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear from the daughter who'd tried to murder me, but curiosity finally won over caution. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten in the careful script Rachel had perfected in Catholic school. She talked about her life in prison, her cellmate who was teaching her to paint, the classes she was taking to earn her bachelor's degree. For 4.5 pages, she sounded almost like the daughter I remembered from before greed had poisoned her heart. But the last paragraph revealed that prison hadn't changed her as much as I'd hoped. I know you probably think I'm a terrible person, she wrote, but I want you to understand that everything I did came from love. Love for my family, love for my son, fear of losing everything we'd worked so hard to build. Maybe my methods were wrong, but my intentions came from the right place. I hope someday you can forgive me and we can have some kind of relationship again. Tyler needs both of us in his life. Love. She was still calling it love, this thing that had driven her to sabotage my car and poison my food. Even after 2 years in prison, Rachel couldn't acknowledge that what she'd done was pure selfishness disguised as family devotion. I never wrote back. Tyler, on the other hand, had become the light of my life. He visited every few weeks, bringing laundry and stories from college, letting me cook for him and fuss over his grades. He'd grown into a fine young man despite everything his parents had put him through, and I was prouder of him than I had words to express. Mom writes to me sometimes, he told me one Sunday afternoon as we worked in my garden together. She keeps asking me to visit her. Do you want to? I asked carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. I don't know. Part of me misses her, you know. She's still my mom, even after everything. But another part of me is angry that she chose money over family, over you. You don't have to decide right now, I said. Or ever. If you don't want to. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. What would Grandpa Robert have done? Tyler asked. I considered the question seriously. Robert had been a forgiving man, but he'd also been practical about protecting the people he loved. I think he would have said that forgiveness doesn't require putting yourself in danger, I said finally. You can forgive your mother without having a relationship with her. You can wish her well without trusting her again. Tyler nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, planting tomatoes and peppers in the raised beds Robert had built for me before his diagnosis. "Grandma," Tyler said eventually, "thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For fighting back, for not letting her get away with it, for showing me that family doesn't mean you have to accept being treated badly." Those words meant more to me than all the money in Robert's accounts combined. The Robert Sullivan Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped over 300 seniors in 2 years, recovered more than $8 million in stolen funds, and sent 47 family members to prison for elder abuse. The statistics were impressive, but the individual stories were what kept me motivated. Like Margaret Thompson, whose daughter had been slowly poisoning her with insulin to cause diabetic episodes that would eventually kill her. Or Frank Rodriguez, whose son had been selling his father's possessions on eBay while telling him that he'd simply misplaced them. Or Helen Chang, whose grandson had convinced her to sign over her house deed by claiming it was a Medicare form. Each case reminded me that what Rachel had done wasn't unique. It was part of a larger epidemic of children who saw their aging parents as obstacles to inheritance rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. But for every horror story, there was also a victory. Every family member we prosecuted, every dollar we recovered, every senior citizen we helped protect, it all felt like redemption. Not just for the victims, but for me as well. I'd started this journey as a grief-stricken widow who'd been betrayed by her only child. I'd ended it as a fighter, an advocate, and a protector of people who couldn't always protect themselves. Now, at 69 years old, I wake up every morning with purpose. I have work that matters, relationships that nourish me, and the satisfaction of knowing that Robert's money is being used to honor his memory in the best possible way. Rachel sits in prison, counting down the years until parole. Brad serves his sentence in a different facility, apparently spending his time writing letters to parole boards that no one reads. Their son Tyler has grown into a man they barely know, shaped by their absence more than their presence. Sometimes, I wonder if things could have been different. If I'd said yes to Rachel's initial demand for $25 million, would we still be a family? Would she have been satisfied, or would she have found new ways to manipulate and control me? I'll never know for sure, but I suspect the money was never really the point. The money was just the excuse Rachel used to justify behavior that came from somewhere much darker, a place where love was conditional, family was transactional, and other people existed primarily to serve her needs. My late husband Robert had left me $30 million and a daughter who tried to kill me for it. In the end, I kept the money and lost the daughter. But what I gained was far more valuable. The knowledge that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, braver than I'd ever needed to be, and capable of protecting not just myself, but others who needed protection. If you're watching this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you're being pressured by family members who see your assets as their inheritance, know that you're not alone. There are people who will help you, laws that will protect you, and options you might not have considered. And if you're watching this story and you recognize someone else in it, a parent or grandparent who might be vulnerable to this kind of abuse, please pay attention. Love shouldn't cost everything you own, and family shouldn't require you to sacrifice your safety or your independence. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it. And now, every day, I use that knowledge to make sure other people don't have to learn it the same way I did. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it's worth the wait. Now, I'm curious about you who are watching my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.